If you've ever had a table that had a column that has several thousand values and you want to filter it down to say 20 or 30 of those values, but they're in not any particular order, and so all you think the best option is just to go through and check the ones that you want, that can be very tedious and long. And if you start searching, it'll clear all the stuff that you've already checked. I'll show you how to write the VBA code where you can take a selection and then tell it which column you're filtering and filter only to those values really simply and quickly. So for this example, I have this tab here that has 22 values that are within the customer column here, but this customer column has hundreds of different values, and I want to filter to this just these 22. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into my developer tab, Visual Basic, and I'm going to add this to the tools that I've created in a previous video, which I will link. But I'm going to call this one sub filter by selection and add some rows in there so I can start writing my macro. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually get the values that I want to filter into a variable. So, and I'm going to call it v values as string, and putting the parentheses in the actual variable name tells Excel that this is going to be an array. And I'm going to give it an incrementer because I'm going to want to have the count of it, because I'm going to have to, it's going to be a indexed array. And I'm going to go ahead and set this at -1 because an indexed array from Excel needs to, or from VBA needs to start at 0. So I'm starting it at -1 because my first one is going to add to it, which will start it at 0. So now that I've set the a variable up that's going to store my data, I'm actually going to put it in there. And so I'm going to do a for loop. So I'm just going to say for I equals 1 to selection.cells.count. So that's essentially whatever I'm selecting over here on the left. Like right now I'm selecting 22 cells. If I made it 2 columns, that's going to be 20 or 44 cells. But it's going to be, so I'm going to cycle through those by doing from 1 to the total number of cells that I have counted. And I'm going to put the value as I'm going through it. So essentially what I'm going to do is going to go check the value. And for every one of these cells, I'm going to go through it. So I'm going to put the actual value into a variable. So that's going to put the value. So the first one, it goes through this for loop. It's going to put Stephen Burton in the sval variable, and then it's just going to cycle through. And the way cells works, if you put row and column, it knows it's indexed. But if you just put a single number, it's going to start left and work right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so this one's going to go all the way through. And I'm just going to make sure it's not empty. Sval. Close my if statement. And if it's not empty, I'm going to add it to my values array. And so to do that, I'm just going to increment my incrementer. I'm going to redim preserve v values j as long or as string. And I'm going to say v values j equals s val. And so I've declared this variable here, but I haven't actually said what dimensions it has or anything like that. When I'm coming down here, I'm re-declaring it and I'm preserving it with this new variable. So if I'm going through once, it's going to redeclare it and say it's a one dimension variable, and then this is what it is. And then I'm setting that particular value. So if I had set, and I use the preserve because if I don't preserve, it'll actually erase whatever is in the variable. But since I'm preserving it, it's actually just going to increase the length of it. And so if I already have 3 things in here, this will increase it to 4 values available. And then I'm setting the 4th value to this, and so on and so forth, going through the entire selection. Because selection essentially is whatever I have highlighted. So now that I have all of the data into memory and it's in an array, I can go to that table and filter it. So now I just need to actually filter the values themselves. So here. Okay, so what that is I'm taking my sheet and range A1 because that's within the table, it's within the columns, and I'm filtering. Field 4 is because on the data it is the 4th column from the left. And then the array, the criteria one is going to be my array that I'm pulling from the selection. And I set it as an array because that's what it requires. And then I'm using operator Excel filter values, which is a function that makes Excel filter them all with all of your values. If you don't put this in here, it'll actually just do like the last value that you have in your array. So you need to choose Excel filter values to make sure it does everything in the selection. So now I need to make sure that I'm on the active sheet as my selection, because if I'm on the data tab, whatever I have selected, the cursor is on the data tab is going to be my selection. So I got to make sure I'm on the active sheet that I want to filter from. So I'm on this sheet and I'm just going to run this. And now if I go to the data tab, it'll actually have filtered, and you could see that it actually filtered to the ones that I specified in those 22 values. I didn't have to go through and manually select them. It all did it very, very, very quickly. So this macro is really nice. It's not very long. However, it is very staticky and it is specific to this workbook. And so it's not going to be very useful and you would have to write it every single time. But we're going to take this to the pro level and actually make this dynamic so the user can use this on any table. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the column header. So I'm going to, the values that the user actually give me, those are actually good and I can use that, and that's going to be dynamic. But what's not dynamic is this column header. So we're going to get the user to give us the column header. And so the first thing I'm going to do is turn off error handling, because I'm going to use the input box. And the input box can give me an error if the user cancels out. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about it. So I just have to turn on error handling, and then I'll turn it back on, or turn it off back when I get the user. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable for the column header that the user is going to select. And I'm going to set the column header equals application.inputbox. Now I'm using the application input box because this one is specific to Excel. There is just a generic input box from VBA, but it is going to be just a generic one and it doesn't have access to the actual cells. And so by using application, which is Excel, like Word's application input box has different stuff and so on and so forth. But the Excel application input box is going to allow me to prompt the user to select cells. Now here's how I'm going to do that. Okay, so let me make this bigger here. And so what this does is I'm turning on error handling. I'm creating a variable that's going to store the column header, and then I'm prompting the user to give me the column header with a little message that says, please select the column. And then it'll actually display the values just in case you selected the wrong tab or something like that. It'll tell you what's stored in that values variable, just so you can cancel out if you did have the wrong selection or something like that. And it's type 8. That is the type of input box that is Excel specific, where it'll actually allow the user to select a range. So just as an example, I'm going to run it real quick. I click play. It's going to have the thing where I select. I go over here, and then you can see it looks just like the Excel select thing where it puts the actual address of the cell in there. But I'm going to cancel that out, and my error handling made it exit the sub, because when I canceled it out, this ran. If I don't cancel out, it'll actually proceed on. So the next thing I need to figure out is this field number column. And the range is A1 as long as the range address is somewhere in the title. It doesn't matter as far as this goes. I could have said D1, E1, as long as it's in the table and it's in that header row. This particular range doesn't matter, but the field does. And I could have been in D1 and said field 1, but that would have still done column A, because this just gets me into the table. This is what's going to get me the actual column that I'm looking for. So this is the important one. So this I'm going to actually write something that'll calculate where this column header is in the table that I selected. And the way to do that is essentially is, so I'm going to select this. It's going to keep going left until it finds a blank or it's at the beginning of the sheet. And so to do that, I'm just pretty much going to offset it a number of times until I actually get to the end or a blank cell. That's how I'm going to know that I'm at the end of my particular table. So first thing I'm going to do is set a 1, because just in case it's the very first one, Okay, so this code block right here is going to find me that column. So I'm going to first think, so when the user selected the column header, if the column is greater than 1, then I have some calculations to do. If it's not greater than 1, meaning it is column 1, then I already know that the column is 1 and I'm good to go. I don't have to go left. And because the field is always going to start from the left and move over. But so essentially, if I'm greater than column 1, I'm not in column A, I'm going to keep moving. So for I equals 1 to the column, because if I'm in column 4, it knows it doesn't need to go past column 4, and it knows it needs to and does not even include column 4 either. So I'm going to move and cycle through them one at a time. And so what I do is I check to make sure if it's offset of 1 is, and I multiply it negative because I'm going to go to the left. If I wanted to go to right, I would just leave that as I. And I'm offsetting it by 0 rows because I want to go from the column I'm selected on the same row, 1 left. And I also make sure that it's not in column 1 because if I keep going left and then I keep going left past the end of the sheet, then I'm going to get an error. So I make sure if it's column 1, just go ahead and take that number. And then if that matches that and I'm at the end or I'm at the end of my data, it's going to record what column I'm at and then exit out. So this is going to get me the column number, the very leftmost column of the table that I'm in. And so now I've got the column, I know where I'm going. And so now I'm no longer going to use this because that's static to this particular workbook. I'm going to say column header dot and then leave the auto filter, and then field where it says 4, I'm going to do the calculated one that I calculated here. I'm going to leave the array and leave the filter values because that's what tells it to do the filter. So now that is fully dynamic. And then one last thing I'm going to add is if I'm not selected on the data tab or the table that I'm looking at, I'm actually going to select it just because I want to, after I filter it, I want to see what I'm looking at. So I'm just going to do a quick check to see if the active sheet equals the column that I selected. And if not, I'm going to actually select it. Dot parent dot select. Oops. Okay. So there we go. And so let's put this here and let's go give it a test. So I'm going to clear this filter that we had going earlier. So now I'm blank again. And I'm going to go over here to my loyal customers. This time I'm only going to select 4. Then I'm going to say play. So now it says these are my 4 that I'm going to select. I'm going to go to my data tab. Just move it out of the way. I'm going to put it in cell D1. Then click OK. You see it went back. And now I'm selected to just those 4. And I can even do that again, and I can even do it on the table itself. So if I do that, click play, say I just want those, I'm going to put it in here. And now I just filtered to those customers. So that is a very quick way, and it has a little bit of code, and this is more pro level when you get to actually making it dynamic. But for those of us who live in Excel and do a lot of filtering and stuff like that, this can save you a lot of time. Now, I provide a link in the description where you can actually go and get this whole tools macros, and all the macros will be in there. And I'll even add a little more comments in there to try to explain how some of these work as well. But other than that, please like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.